And so today, let us begin. We asked uh, three people to assist um, the activities throughout the week in only one language. So somebody was following in French, another one in Spanish, and the third one in English. And we asked them, of course, we didn't ask them to do a whole synthesis of the whole week's activities, and that would have been just a monumental task. But we just wanted them to share with us about their perspectives, their thoughts about the symposium, and, for example, what challenges were brought up, what are the solutions that we talked about, and what do these people take away from these conversations? And there were maybe like 40 workshops, and so there was really a lot of exchanges and really rich conversations that happened this week. And so, to let us do this, I'd like to present to you our first panelist, who will present to do. It's Bas'Ilele Malomalo, who is a sociology teacher at Humanities Institutes of Integration, University of Afro-Brazilian people, and she's also a member of Natural Harmony Network. But please go and learn more about Bas'Ilele's biography, because it is so rich and diversified, and I didn't have time to tell you everything about him so far. So, Bas'Ilele, are you here? Can we hear you? Yes, I'm here. Thank you for inviting me today. I want to share my thankfulness and gratitude. I learned so much with you all, and it was great. I was following the entire event from Brazil. So I am an Afro-Congolese uh, member of the Black population, and I am keeping very informed with African political movements. And we did talk about African political movements and social movements, and involving both men and women, um, both Black women and Black men in its diversity. And so on Facebook and Zoom, I was there the whole time, especially certain words caught my attention in some of the sessions I was participating. So I will try to pin some of these points. I think the question of So about the approach that we all agree on, everybody is in agreement that there is a major crisis, both ecological, financial, human, health crisis. And so we do have solutions, but we have to identify which of these solutions can interact in a global solution. So there are intellectuals who are thinking really hard about this in a very common perspectives, but other people have more southern perspectives. And so I would like to underscore uh, the diversity of experiences and perspectives according on mythology, geography, position, and etc. And I think that the university world poses a problem because it is centering on a European model. So this causes a problem because if we want to talk about different content and use different aesthetics, methodology that are centering on Native and Black people experiences. And so this is a problem that we are contending with both here in Brazil and in Africa and Northern America. And so a lot of Black people feel that their experiences aren't related in the university world. And so we have this paradigm that we have to contend with. Maybe we have to recenter on Pachamama or on African philosophy, and maybe take the intellectual heritage of our countries seriously. We draw from ancient Egypt and from the Hatchet paradigm. and the Ubuntu concept, as Gina Tise was presenting earlier. So these different approaches can be drawn onto so that we can conjugate our efforts so that we can come to a true intellectual dialogue. There are many paths for us to reach to this effort, but what we are constructing right now is a diatopical perspective, which will include different criteria, respect, and the acknowledgement of the painful past that was brought to us by colonialism and slavery, sexism, ecological violence. But at the same time, I see this relationship between reconciliation of in a universal versus individual perspective. And earlier, I was listening to the presentations of Sulimare, and he was talking about a pluralism of a universal pluralism. And then we went from that concept to a pluriversality, so a kind of plural diversity. And so when Gina talked about the concept of educiri, to think about education, this was really interesting to me. And when we talked about um, accompanied communications, as was presented by Lucy Sauvé, that really sparked my interest. And the last point was Paul Carr's presentation drawed our attention on demilitarization. I think this is a central point in Black people's liberations agenda, be it in Africa or Brazil. There was a genocide against the Black population of the world that began in the 18th century with the slavery, and this genocides are still continuing in modernity. So decolonial paradigms show us that the modern slave was built from the exploitation of the Black bodies and Native bodies. And so day to day, we have to deconstruct um, our daily sorrow between Black and Black women and men. And so I was thankful to be brought into contact with different paradigms. And Gina, I just want to say that I will be by your side to bring some change. And I'm looking forward to meeting new people to continue having these conversations. So I hope that the projects that we think about here will, so we hope that our work, our intellectual here will be able to touch other people outside of the population, because Black university thinkers and philosophers don't think in a silo. They want to be able to transform society in a positive way. And so that's what I want to say. We have to share our intellectual work. And thank you so much for doing so this week. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you so much, Bas'Ilele. It's great that what you said, how true knowledge does transform, when we were talking about the importance of collaboration between the university academic world and the civil society. And so we were talking about the powerful transformative power of practical, theoretical, and knowledge skills between traditional knowledge and academic knowledge. And so thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And now I'd like to invite our next speaker,
Charmain Levy, to present her reflections on the week. Charmain is, amongst other things, professor of social sciences at the University of Quebec in Outaouais, specializing in international development studies, feminist studies, political sociology, and Latin American studies. And again, I invite you to go see all the other wonderful things that she's doing. So Charmain, the next 10 minutes are yours to share your thoughts about some of the English workshops that you attended and the week in general at the symposium.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And I just, first of all, for the translators, can you hear me? Is my microphone working? That's really important. Okay, good. I'd first like to thank Nancy and Paul and Gina for inviting me to this this activity, this symposium. It's been a wonderful week. I've learned so much. And I think if I had one word, it would be inspiring. I think a lot of the experiences, a lot of what has been said is very inspiring and does give a lot of hope. I'm not going to be as eloquent as Bas'Ilele. Pretty much, I'm just going to go back and highlight some of the things that were brought forth in the workshops and the panels. And I'll do that in the order of the workshop and the English speaking panels. So, and I'll try to just go over, highlight what was recurrent in a lot of the panels. So first of all, in the first panel, there was the issue of diversity and particular issues that have to do with context, and using James Banks' theory of transitional theory, where the major goal is equity pedagogy and the need to understand how to treat different needs rather than diversity for diversity's sake. And there was the issue of encouraging students to see identity as multiple, to expand their ideas beyond their own context. The need for proper training for teachers to be able to move ideas into action was brought forth, and viewing challenges to global citizenship education instead as opportunities. The most significant issue of equity pedagogy is the qualitative element of equity. And it is challenging to define equity precisely. So that was brought forth as a challenge. What is equity? But there is the possibility to make use of students' experiences. And this was another recurring idea in several workshops, is making use of students' ideas. By nurturing social relationships, we nurture an individual's equity in their mind. And therefore, students and teachers can realize that there are different ways of thinking to achieve the same purposes. So student social relations on a daily basis contribute to their views on equity and fairness. And teachers should encourage students to share and apply their views on equity and fairness in the classrooms. Teachers should actively create relevant materials to help cultivate students' views on equity and fairness. Concerning the second panel of democracy and conflict in the United States, another issue that was brought forth was that citizen education can involve and should involve oral histories. And the example of hip hop culture in terms of music, dance, and street art among racialized and Indigenous youth in Canada and the United States is an excellent example, because it helps youth find their voice and express their needs and rights. And it provides a community to youth, as well as self-esteem and destigmatization. And it helps them develop a critical understanding of the world and bring a new portrait of youth, looking at them as active citizens instead of objects. So this helps in attempting to create a space for marginalized voices and perspectives to emerge and be supported through careful exposure to difference. There is also, we have talked about the ability to adopt one outside perspective that can create an ability to identify and understand others. And understanding who is really participating in change versus stakeholders who are invested in the status quo. So looking at the different sides and who we're up against, and identifying those voices who are not being heard can be a key moment for creating the ability to elevate and amplify those voices in order to create the potential for equitable spaces and voices. Some of the proposals involve developing programs that are culturally relevant to the context of youth, with people who are able to speak to those issues through experience, and to begin to do proper work within international context, beginning by learning the language, making contacts with people who are deeply involved in the context and who face similar conditions to the pool. So really working with the grassroots. In the next panel on youth participation, civic engagement, and education for democracy, which was really interesting because it approached the issue of interconnectivity of humans, animals, and nature, and the oneness or one welfare, and the importance of the human-animal bond and the human-nature bond in our lives for our own well-being. It also talked about human impact on the environment and animal health and the different ways in which that happened, which in turn can impact human health, as we have seen with COVID. So we affect humans as humans, we affect everything through our choices, and we need a humane education among youth in order for young people to understand this impact and to take action in their own way. The one welfare framework is based on the interrelated nature of our planet, and it leads to humane education, that is fostering empathy, which also means creativity and critical thought about the experience of others and respecting the living world, and which also leads to expanding the circle of compassion. And that's another word that that came out in more than one panel. Concerning the next panel in We Are All Connected and One Welfare and Humane Education in Building Capacity and Fostering Empathy in Our Future Leaders. Big title, lots to unpack there. We talked about the need for education for a class that actively assumes its own interests and a mass movement from below. So this is what we need for any kind of change to come forth, and this has been shown throughout history. And there were many thoughts on decolonializing education, to move to a community of learners, to curiosity about the land and its being, and that critical pedagogy must be a living pedagogy in everyday relationships, living consistently a commitment in open and loving thought. We must be more self-reflective in our enactment of our pedagogy and create solidarity across differences, which is not easy, but has to be done for the benefit of everybody and for the benefit of ourselves. We need to engage with a wider variety of perspectives and mobilize our democratic capacities to engage in different ways of knowing and being in the world, in contrast to conservative notions. Some of the proposals included a need to see more collaborations among different actors, like veterinarians, scientists, agricultural agencies, governments, and there were some very good examples of that as well. And also to reach children at a time when they are still curious and open to different viewpoints, and where it's easy to show them different perspectives, be they human or not, or non-human. So another proposal was creating partnerships with educators, learning what is important for them, opening pathways for diverse students to succeed according to their own measures. In the next panel, Perspectives of Democracy and Social and Global Citizenship, we talked about global inquiry that allows for critical analysis that leads to action. The information gaps and literacies for the most marginalized that exist, information as a barrier. Sometimes it can be embedded. There was a good example in terms of education in a refugee camp. And questions such as who has the power and agency to ask questions, because most of the time, those who are marginalized, they feel they don't have that power to ask questions. So they stay silent, we don't hear their voices. And there was a good presentation on civic engagement programs in schools and participatory education within schools. So some of the questions that were asked were how to scale up participation and make it more accessible in the schools. In terms of inclusive school participatory budget that involved validating voices, in the impact of students on their community partnerships with schools, which were really important. And sometimes it was highlighted that sometimes it's best to work incrementally in order to deal with conservatism and bureaucracy, which is very ingrained in a lot of our societies, and that we see, which is more visible today. That participatory budgeting should be contextualized and open to new innovative ideas coming from the grassroots. And there should be a measuring of students' self-perceptions of belonging, empowerment, and decision-making. That is very important, to ask the students how they see that, what is their perspective of their own participation. We talked about core pedagogy, connecting children to education, empowering them to make a difference in their lives, and having teachers and students learning with and from each other.
There's about a minute left, Charmain, just to let you know.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'll go to going back to the issue about animals, humans and non-humans, the importance of connecting physical and social environments with all living species, recognizing the conflict that exists in terms of laws that view animals as properties, as not as saints beings. Also, the idea that the global reflects that there is a culture or existence that is located nowhere, but that we are all interconnected on a shared planet that is reflected in our local context. And a global perspective can help us see colonialism and neoliberalism. And going back to what Latour said, that there are only a whole collection of locals. So we have to think differently about who we are. And we have to have the moral courage to confront our collective and colonial histories and do something about it. And I'll end with this. That was said in the panel on the Canadian Commission for UNESCO and Sustainable Development Goals, that there is no truth and conciliation without facing the truth. We need to reconcile our relationship with the planet in order to reconcile our social relations, and that is the core of global citizenship. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Charmain. Wow, it makes you realize how I think everybody wishes that we were trilingual and able to also be in 3 places at once during the past week, because there's so much, wow, so many interesting discussions that took place. Thank you for that. Ahora me voy a invitar a Orlando Perez de Paraguay de compartir sus reflexiones.
Orlando from Paraguay to share his reflections in Spanish. Orlando Perez is a professor and researcher in education and innovation and organizational systems, intercultural practices, interorganizational pedagogy, sustainability, and multimodal learning methods. Orlando.
Bien, hola, buen día, ¿me escuchan? Bien. Bueno,
hello, can you hear me well? Hello.
Good morning, buen día. En guaraní. De alguna forma, el trabajo que se fue dando, y antes de empezar allí, agradecer tanto a la organización por este espacio de reflexión y a todos los colegas.
Work that was undertaken to create this space for reflection amongst colleagues, friends, that we had the opportunity to think through all these issues together. It's wonderful. There were a number of recurring questions that have come out and really were present in all the different discussions that took place this week in the Spanish language sessions. First, before getting into those, in one of the activities, there was a need to work in parallel. Everybody wanted to be everywhere at once, and sometimes technology allows that, but often not. But we did have to undertake comparisons during the process, not just at the end as a conclusion. We needed to make these comparisons as we went along, make adjustments to the format to meet any challenges that arose during our discussions. as new information came out. So from the very beginning, almost, we had our participants say, what are we doing to be able to compare, to be able to assimilate all of these different elements that are being produced in parallel? So I would like to begin by speaking about the richness of the work that was accomplished. And I think the most important aspect was the richness of the discussions that we had. We've had challenges. Why do I say that? Yeah, in some ways, it's a bit ironic. You know, Latin Americans sometimes have trouble with timekeeping. But the discussions were much richer than the time than we really had for them. And that means that we must continue these discussions. And we must find a way to hold a informal event where we can be happy with the shared work that we have undertaken. One of the aspects that comes out very strongly associated with the challenges when we are trying to confront a system that has been imposed on us for so long. And certainly over this period of the COVID-19 pandemic, these discussions and this analysis allows us to see that there is a crisis, and we know that. This space created by the crisis also provides us with an opportunity to intervene in a transformative manner to try and alter the capitalist system. And the neoliberalism is already disappearing. It may have already disappeared. But we can't simply accept its disappearance without going further. We must undertake necessary actions to ensure that capitalism disappears as well. So let's summarize the themes that came out. The work in terms of intellectual constructions, development of models, operated a lot through a deconstruction of ideas and analysis. We're talking about transformation, but transformation includes elements that can sometimes place limits. We must transform in order to reconfigure. And I hesitate to use the word reconfigure because this often means a reconfiguration of something that's already existing, whereas the crisis offers a larger break than that. So I prefer to use a term like construction, something that follows from destruction. You can't have construction without destruction. So when we talk about the construction of new models, we have to talk about the elements that need to be included in terms of pedagogy, understandings, knowledge, know-how, knowing how to be. And the themes that we have included also included coexistence. Another concept that came out of our discussions, and that wasn't explicitly named, is this idea of a union. We are united, and in unity we find perfection, and in diversity, with our different visions, we develop a common view of the world. And we must seek to understand a construction of global and local citizenship, a form of democracy that's rooted in participation and active decision-making by citizens so that things can be done differently, not just transferring a normative process for decision-making, but having a transformative system. We spoke about that. This is something that is present everywhere. We're talking about the transformation of education. In Paraguay, transformation of education is very important aspect, but it doesn't really take into account education that is transformative. We want to transform education, but we must consider whether we're transforming it into something that will really allow us to reach the objectives that we're seeking. And that's what I wanted to add here. Recurrence was also an important theme. Territory is a critical aspect of each community's considerations. Not just communities that are defined by a given language or the values that they possess, but as was said during one of the panels, there was also a lot of discussion around migrations. Today, we are all migrants. And I think that's evident. We're all in a process of migration without necessarily even noticing it. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's slower, but we are all affected. Some degree or another, and this is what came out in the panels, is the necessity of integrating each of these elements into our concepts of education. I'm not sure how much time I have left, Nancy. About a minute left. Okay, thank you. And so one challenge that arose through our discussions, and I took up a challenge 10 years ago to transform a system of education into a more holistic and integrated model. There is a dichotomy and a disjunction, a challenge that exists between different considerations of education. But it must be understood that education is a living tree. A tree that transforms as it grows. And there are elements that we saw over the course of these sessions which really led to this notion that diversity is what leads to unity. And we can have a single tree so that our fruits can be what the environment needs. And trees are everywhere, and fruit too. That they can grow very different fruits based on the ecosystem where we're located. So what I'm trying to do is to summarize this large discussion in a very general way. I hope that was an adequate interpretation of what was said. It was a huge responsibility to try and synthesize how, all of the discussions that took place over the course of a week. It was a significant responsibility, and I hope that I performed it adequately. We have shared this space, and I hope that we have made it into a space for learning. And now this space that we have created must be maintained and reinforced so that we can continue to work on these processes as a network. This incredible idea of working together in 3 languages must also be maintained. So let us work together and let's think about the best way to use technology to continue moving forward so we can listen to each other fully, but also so that we can offer a possibility to others to hear us. I think we're going to continue to think about and talk about these issues, that we continue to be intellectual activists. Well, thank you very much. There are very rich considerations. They will motivate us to continue working on these issues. Okay, so I'll switch back to French now. And I would like to open the floor to all of you. If you'd like to write in the chat questions that you'd like to pose to any of the panelists or share your own reflections. We already have people who have begun writing their takeaways, the idea of education as a weapon of transformation. So I would invite you to use the chat box to share whatever you feel, or in your reactions at the bottom, you can also lift your hand. We could have brief speaking turns. Obviously, we want to try and share the time that we have here together. So if you'd like to offer a brief note or consideration from these, it's not an evaluation of the week, but any takeaways that you have that you feel that you'd like to share, possible solutions, courses of action that might be possible when faced with these issues at a planetary scope. So, I mean, feel free to type into the chat box, or you can lift your hand and we can have some other speakers. It's a Friday. I know we're all starting to feel tired, but I'm sure others still have some things they'd like to share.
Bueno, hay Georgina Santa Cruz que dit la riqueza de propuestas es enorme al haber participado aún fuera en unas... Oups, attends. Ça va vite, c'est bon, on commence.
The richness of the proposals was wonderful. Having only participated in some of the sessions, it means that I was given, it was offered a lot of reflections that I'll share with my colleagues. There was also a note about how movements in the forward transition in Quebec, even that are seeking a convergence of struggles, tend to remain divided between Francophone and Anglophone groups. And so there's certainly challenges there linguistically as well. This week brought a lot of reflections of interesting things to share with students in sociology and pedagogy. We could really try to expand our paradigms and identify blind spots in terms of multilingualism. And would anybody like to speak as well? You can feel free to lift your hand. Eloy Rivas Sanchez. Eloy Rivas. So I'll be speaking in Spanish. I hope that's okay. So I was very inspired and very appreciative of the fact that it's possible to speak Spanish in this environment. I had the opportunity to participate in a number of sessions, and there were two in particular where I was able to speak, but I really listened a lot every day this week. And one of the primary concerns that arose, particularly in the panels that I assisted in, was this idea that democracy is under threat with the increase of extreme right-wing movements, a number of anti-democratic processes underway. There's the increase in misinformation and disinformation we've seen over the course of this crisis, all of things converging to create an anti-democratic hegemony. I also heard from my colleagues this idea of global citizenship and the different possibilities that it offers us be a part of the world. They're not always well presented or discussed. But one thing that was noted, a challenge that we've had to face over the COVID-19 pandemic, was the way in which borders have been closing. There's a number of groups that have become increasingly precarious. You have migrants who are being essentially expulsed from society, and considerations of citizenship are being narrowed in many places. There's attacks from conservative and anti-democratic groups. And I think there's this critical need to articulate a theory, a practice, a praxis of, with university researchers working alongside civil society to put forward a transformative program for a worldwide social program that truly takes the poorer populations into account. There's an important responsibility for intellectual workers in universities here, not only to reflect at what is to be done. It's obviously important. Of course, it is a type of activism. But beyond that, to learn from civil society and to develop programs to defend democracy, to defend global citizenship. This idea of an internationalist alliance that's rooted in a mutual understanding. And that's what I wanted to share today. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the work that you've done. It's absolutely surpassed my expectations. Aditi Kulkarni, and then our next speaker.
Hello, everyone. If it is okay, I could continue in English.
Of course.
Thanks a lot. My name is Aditi. I'm from India. I'm a student, a master's student in education and psychology. I attended the session on Monday and Tuesday, and especially after Peter and Antonia's talk, there were two questions in my head. First of all, I like the idea. It's not just an idea, it's a movement of transformative education and global collaboration. And this is my first time to interact with a lot of wonderful and eminent personalities here. Although I have two questions. My first question is democracy just an imagined reality? Like in 21st century, where we are talking about global collaboration and transformative education, bringing everybody together, thinking of like the world is my family. Why do we, democracy, the idea is very charming. Am I lacking as a proponent of democracy and a transformative education? Do I not have that platform to put forward the charm of the democracy? See, it is a reality that in 21st century, if you see Instagram, even someone who's got very little, but some eminent talent, they are becoming famous. I'm not talking about becoming famous or gaining some kind of glamour for democracy, but do we need a platform? And if we have that platform, are we not as a team utilizing that platform effectively and efficiently, considering the 21st century needs and the ideas and the perceptions and perspectives of this generation? I grew up watching Bollywood movies, and I really appreciate them for, sometimes some movies are really bizarre, you know, but the idea, the publication, the marketing of movies, it looks so charming that the audience is convinced that, oh, there's something, let's go and watch it. Are we not creating enough platforms for people to come and join and see the charm of democracy in this time, in the 21st century? Yes, that's my question, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak. I don't know, I'm just nervous, but thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Aditi. I'm going to invite Tanya Ramalho to ask her question or share her thoughts, and then I'm going to give the last few minutes, just a return to the panelists, Bas'Ilele, Charmain, and Orlando, if you want a word of the end before I talk about the next steps for the day. Tanya Ramalho.
Yes, I did not have the opportunity to attend every single session, though I intend fully to look at all the videos that are going to be available, because the sessions that I attended, I learned a lot from each one of them. In particular, to reframe my own critical pedagogy practice. I'm a professor of critical pedagogy here in Oswego, New York. But one of the questions that I have, and that perhaps we can think about for the future, what happens to my students? I teach teachers, so there's a multiplying effect. And I have these young teachers who absolutely are dedicated to their students. They want to have their practice to be student-focused. They want to address social justice issues. And what happens is that when they are hired in extremely undemocratic schools, and public schools in the United States have become undemocratic sites. And they, of course, they want to have tenure, and they have a job and have a life and get married and have kids, right? And they forget about, because they don't have a space to practice their democratic, including and foremost with the curriculum that's imposed. So my concern is for the future and for people to think is, how do we create agents that are resilient and that can really bring change from inside organizations such as schools? And really transform. I love that idea of transforming. They want to transform education, but not have education for transformation. And that's so critical. So I'm concerned about that. How do we work in these spaces that are undemocratic and continue the resilience for change? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Donc, la session tire déjà à sa fin. Il reste juste 9 minutes. Donc, je vais demander un petit mot de la fin de Bas'Ilele, et si Charmain et Orlando veulent.
Now I'll offer a final word to our panelists today. I'll offer you a opportunity to press conclusions, and I would encourage everyone to look in the chat. There was information about how to access the videos and other information from this week. Bas'Ilele to start. Yes, thank you very much. Maybe just remember some final questions around democracy, how to create agents for change, etc., and respond however you feel like you can.
Right, so as I was saying, I think the most important part, I'm sorry, I'm just going to change my language choices because I can hear the translation. So there's no dialogue, and I think that's a really important piece. And this week has allowed us to draw this connection, because we can't act in silos and have a disconnected action. That's not the right goal. And so we really need to retrieve our connection, but this process does not allow us to do everything, but we will get there. And I hope that we can see each other in person again so we can touch each other and be together. But I'm thrilled to see that there is this movement that is taking form, and there is a convergence, there are ideas being shared, and UNESCO as a institution is focusing on a pluralist, globalist perspective. And so two questions need to be answered. I think the university sector has major problems.
Les paradigmes hérocentrés a des problèmes. Le deuxième point, les dialogues avec les mouvements sociaux, important. Et comme éducateur, quand nous
development with different movements. We talk about transformative agents. I'm in Brazil. We have people who go on to doctorates, and they're prepared to behave in ways that are very new, very different from previous generations. The current generation that we are training understand that they have a responsibility to transform the world. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bas'Ilele.
Just
Or answer questions.
a few brief final words. I think one of the ideas that came through today and throughout the week was that we have to continue working in our own spheres of influence, and in order to change things. And as Bas'Ilele said, in terms of higher education, universities are a problem, but it's also an opportunity because we can change minds. And as in terms of education, we can change minds. And if, in a classroom of, 50 students, if I can change 10% of that, that's great. That's very powerful. It's very powerful. And I think in a certain way, I personally feel very privileged to be in that position to change minds, to make students more empathetic and, fight together for a better world, right? But I think the other part is, how do we work together for real change? So, and I think that's what we're leading up to in the next session, is what means can we give each other, and especially this week, those who participated in the different activities. How can we continue? Through what means can we continue fighting together for real change? And what kind of connections can we make? And I think that's, given the technology that we have, it can be done at a distance, and I think it can be done with some kind of platform, and that can take different forms. It can be more active in terms of participating together in different projects, whether it be research or outreach, or it can just be sharing different experiences that are inspiring. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Charmain. Orlando, ¿hay algunas reflexiones finales? Hay que abrir el micrófono.
Sí, está abierto.
Sí, está bien, está bien.
Sí, ahora lo que pasa es que tengo dos controles y ese me está poniendo loco. Bien, hay una cuestión importante. Yo, como es resumen, quisiera justamente hacer hincapié en lo que creo que al final hemos estado conversando, el espacio de diálogo que tiene que ser fluido, constante, permanente, transversal, intercultural. Eso es un elemento importante. Y el otro es que si queremos generar transformaciones de abajo para arriba, nosotros tenemos que trabajar en la educación de arriba para abajo. O sea, en mi trabajo como investigador, yo investigo innovaciones, y uno de los grandes temas que tiene que ver con el cambio es la resistencia. Pero también arriba están los que toman decisiones para generar
So something that's particularly important is the idea of resistance and transformation, this idea of change. specifically is experienced by people at the base. And so we need to work within social groups and alongside them to continue to produce democracy. There is this neoliberal system that puts us into a world of illusions, and we must break those illusions to bring something out new, something that we want to have to take its place. And I think this is an important space that we must occupy and utilize. And I hope that it's open for us to continue moving forward. We may not have been able to participate in every single presentation, but this has been immensely enriching. I've had an opportunity to learn an immense amount alongside all of you. The last thing that I wanted to say is thank you. Thank you all.
Donc, cette session-ci,
Orlando.
Et j'aimerais présenter la suite donc de la journée.
Just wanted to explain how the rest of the day will go. As I said, this is the last day of the symposium. There'll be 2 workshops for the rest of the day today that are developed to be complementary. They'll be a little bit different than the other presentations we've had this week. We have an amazing team of facilitators for each language who are going to be running parallel sessions, all with the same format, but obviously each in a different language. And these workshops are going to be participatory, both in their style and in the way that they operate. We invite people, obviously, to open their cameras, to be active, depending on the number of people, potentially have breakout rooms for discussions. So the first workshop that starts at 10:30 will be to work off of the synthesis that was offered this morning and try to develop and identify strategies that could be prioritized. What are strategies that have already been noted? How can they be prioritized so that we can continue to act collectively? I saw in the survey, a number of people said, the importance of continuing to act together. So we'll be focusing on that in this first workshop, and also to try and identify strategies that have worked in the past and that could inspire us to continue working collectively going forward. The second workshop will seek to explore concrete solutions, different actions, projects, ideas that would allow for networking or continuation of what began here in the symposium. So those will be the workshops this morning. And then at the closing session, the 3 facilitators from the workshops this morning will provide a summary so that the people from each language group will be able to access the richness of the reflections produced by all of their colleagues in the other languages. So we are 1 minute behind on our schedule. You have a 14-minute break before joining your next calls for the workshops at 10:30. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bas'Ilele, Charmain, for having presented your summaries, for having followed everything over the course of the week, and we'll see you all again very soon.